Association. PMA is a full-service trade association representing the $113 billion metal forming industry of North America. The association supports a network of more than 80,000 professionals from nearly 900 companies. Today's webinar on cost models for metallic commodities will feature the Purchasing Authority's Vice President of Cost Engineering, Bob Max. Now I would like to introduce Bob Max, who will demonstrate how should-be cost models streamline metallic commodity sourcing and purchasing.
Great, thanks, Chrissy. I appreciate the opportunity to speak today. First, as we go through, and I will just kind of make a quick observation, everybody, of a lot of slides to get through today. So there will be opportunities throughout the webinar to ask questions. Please feel free to do that through the appropriate channels that are available to you, and we'll do our very best to answer all those questions at the end of the webinar. However, should we run out of time, please know that we will address all the questions within the next few business days. We'll get back to everybody and make sure that your questions are answered. So please don't hesitate to ask questions. So with that being said, very quickly, let me go through the agenda that we're going to look at today. Again, and this is going to be fairly fast moving, and I appreciate everybody's attendance. So we're going to go through and look at some of the current trends that we see relative to supply chain management, the things that are helping drive what's happening in our industry today. Talk about accelerating strategic relationships and why open book cost modeling is an appropriate thing to do, and really the value that it brings, and why everybody should consider it going forward. We'll also look at the financial impact of a cost modeling program using open book cost modeling. There are a few examples in here that we're going to go through very quickly. Again, just sort of depicting the types of information that you will need to kind of explore and be prepared to share. And then we'll talk a little bit about benchmarking cost drivers and how you can use that information both as a supplier and a customer. We're going to talk about how best to use some of those cost drivers, some of that information to identify strategic suppliers going forward and help you make good decisions for your business, or to help your customers make good decisions for their business. And then we'll continue by talking a little bit about how you use some of that information to build savings roadmaps and quote improvement, and how open book costing can really help along those lines. And then we'll kind of sort of wrap it up toward the end by talking about how to engage suppliers in open book cost modeling, and really looking at that not only from a supplier to a large tier 1 or an OEM, but really also looking at it from down the food chain, and engaging suppliers, sub-suppliers, and why it's important to do that, and how to get started with your own program. So very quickly then, my background. Again, my name is Bob Max. I'm the Vice President of Cost Engineering here at APD. I have spent the last almost 26 years now of my career in supply chain with large tier 1s, as you see them listed there. The last 18 or so years I've been in purchasing for those companies, both on the direct and indirect procurement side. So I bring with me a fairly interesting background in that I am not a cost engineer by trade. I'm more of a purchasing guy by trade, but believe very strongly in the fact that cost engineering can play a very important role going forward, both to win and maintain business in the long run. So very quickly, a shameless plug for Advanced Purchasing Dynamics. We're a very small advisory firm. We're consultants. And as you see the 6 tiles on the screen there, these are the 6 areas that we deal on. And it is all driven by purchasing. We're not a general consultant. We strictly deal with things that apply to purchasing. So what are we seeing happening in purchasing right now? What are the trends? And obviously, a lot of things changed back in and around 2008 with financial crisis that hit not only North America but globally, and that really only the strong survived from those rough times. Another important trend that we've seen is that the typical LTA, contracted annual cost reductions, were challenged. So a typical 3% year-over-year cost reduction, people have begun to challenge that and try to get away from that. We are seeing a trend in increased collaboration, not just on weight reduction, but more importantly on cost reduction and quality improvements. And as I mentioned earlier, not just within the 4 walls of your company, but also throughout the supply chain, and challenging people to help save ultimately for the people who are installing and selling that part to an end consumer. and a move toward upfront early awarding of business. That's become incredibly important to everybody within the supply chain, so that you have an opportunity not to be involved at the last minute in sort of a 3 quotes and a cloud of dust sort of mentality or approach to it, but being upfront in the upfront involvement, helping design the parts and figure out how to take cost out from inception, and not just having it land on your desk at the last minute when you're already, kind of behind the 8 ball trying to get products manufactured and to where they need to go in very short order. Also, something that has happened over the last few years is that when you look at purchasing organizations, not only in the large tier 1s in automotive, but in many other aspects of business and many other purchasing organizations, the move away from a traditional sort of purchasing executive running purchasing who's always been involved in some aspect of purchasing, but now to people who have had more engineering and manufacturing experience in their career. And also, and I'm sure for those who are tier 1 suppliers right now or tier 2 suppliers in the automotive industry, what you see is the fact that there is more expectation and higher pressure on having cost standards and cost models available, not only with the OEMs, but your suppliers and your sub-suppliers to help accelerate any sort of continuous improvement, aka cost reduction activities. So just a few examples of what we've seen. In front of us is a copy of a recent General Motors press release where a gentleman, Mark Royce, has taken over responsibility for purchasing for General Motors. And as you can see there, he not only oversees global purchasing, but is also responsible for design and engineering in General Motors. His predecessor at General Motors, a lady by the name of Grace Lieblein, was also had engineering background before she took over purchasing. And what I find most interesting here is the first of the 2 quotes there, where she said, "I don't want to talk to CEOs about T's and C's. I want to be talking about technology, quality, and driving waste from the system." So very interesting, because of the people who are now starting to dominate the purchasing frontier come at it with a little bit different mentality. Again, as I mentioned before, no longer a 3 quotes and a cloud of dust or a brute force and clumsiness sort of mentality to purchasing, where people pound their fist on the table and demand cost reductions, but hopefully people who are, at least at this point in time, giving off the aura of they want to talk about real-life data and examples and ways to drive waste from the system. Right? Same at Ford. Tony Brown's successor, Hua Tai Tung, was also an engineering vice president, and also at Fiat Chrysler. Scott Garberding is now vice president of purchasing, and he was in charge of manufacturing prior to ascending to his current position. So again, it's a theme out there of people coming from outside of purchasing and trying to drive collaboration who bring a little different view of the world with them to try to help get away from sort of that old school combative mentality. Now, I will tell you in recent trainings that we have done and talks that we have given along the same lines where we've actually talked about this point, a number of people have brought up, yes, I hear what you're saying, and that message is loud and clear from the very tops of the organizations, but we're seeing something very different from the buyers when they come to us. They're still trying to pound on us for cost. And I guess my best response to that is, these are very large organizations, and there's a lot of people in the food chain from top to bottom, and it's just going to take some time, frankly, for some of these big companies to change the way they're doing business and to really kind of walk the talk, as it were. And probably the most important bit of advice I can give everybody is don't be afraid to push back a little bit. If the people that you're in contact with are still trying to pound the table and get you to give them a lower cost without having some of these discussions driven by data that make sense, obviously do it in a professional manner, but don't be afraid to say, gosh, that's not what I'm hearing from your leadership. We're supposed to be doing business in a little bit different way. So why is this all important? Well, really, what it gets us to is a more strategic and hopefully collaborative way of doing business, right? In the past, and for those of us who've been in purchasing for a long time, we're very used to being beaten on by our customers and told that we just need to do things a certain way, that they're really going to kind of enforce their demands on us, and we're kind of along for the ride if we want the business. Now, we have seen that change quite a bit in the last few years, and really driven by the 4 bullet points at the bottom of the slide. technology. Where are we today and where do we need to be 5 years from now? And how do my suppliers help me get from where I'm at today and where do I need to be? And having the ability to identify those suppliers and identify them as key suppliers and people I want to be doing business with going forward. I want to be working with suppliers who can help me get to market faster, trying to compress the time from conceptual realization to be able to market a product and not take years and years, but I want to be able to get that down to months, and who is really in a position to help me do that. Further, obviously, with all the news and popular press over the last year or so relative to warranty and warranty recalls, quality has always been a high priority, and I think even more so now with some of the things that have happened, and obviously the millions and millions, if not billions of dollars that each of these companies are now facing in warranty recalls. And then always, from a purchasing perspective, cost improvement is always going to be something that is near and dear to everyone's heart. And hopefully, as we talk today, we see that we want to get away from the traditional LTAs with 2 or 2.5 or 3% worth of cost reductions annually baked in, with a little bit of VAVE thrown in on top, and really get to a best-in-class or an open book cost model right up front, where we don't have to wait for 3 or 5 years to get our best pricing, but we can have a data-driven discussion to get the best pricing immediately. The next slide is something that we look at here at APD, and we simply call it our cost transparency curve. And what we're really just trying to represent here is the fact that there are various ways to try to go about doing business from a purchasing perspective, either just dealing in piece price, or if you're fortunate enough to have cost breakdowns or have the ability to do cost estimates or kind of bottom up or should be costing, or even if you've gotten to a point now where you can do open book costing with with your customers or your suppliers. We're just simply trying to show that on the bottom, the horizontal axis, that it takes time to kind of progress along this continuum to try to get to open book costing. But if you do, on the the vertical axis, when we look at level of transparency, that there's a direct correlation between the level of transparency, aka being able to understand how a product is really made and what the cost drivers are, that there's a direct correlation with the savings there. If we take just a slightly different look at the cost transparency curve here, and I'll throw some colors in there, and also a box, and I'll blow that box up for everybody in just a minute to talk about. The message here is very simple, that open book costing or should be cost modeling or cost estimates are not for every single product out there, and that's kind of what we're representing in the box. And let me blow that up a little bit more here. That if we really look at and try to segment commodities by the number of suppliers, and again that's going left to right, from many suppliers to few, so it's a little bit counterintuitive the way we've laid this out, and compare it along moving in the vertical from bottom to top, the impact on a buyer's business, meaning does it have low impact on the bottom and high impact on the top. There are some things that dealing strictly on price makes a lot of sense, and those are typically things that we would truly regard as commodities. Here we have things like fasteners in there with a relatively low dollar value purchase on an annual basis there. And really the things we're going to talk about today in terms of open book costing are those things that are represented in the kind of the upper left quadrant there in the orange or tan color, depending on what color you're picking up on your screen, or really where we want to be. And those are things that typically where there are many suppliers who can provide those products, and the impact on the buyer's business is very high. So there's a lot at stake, but there are a lot of choices that you have available to you if you want to buy a particular reasonably simple stamping or an injection molded part. Relative to those things that appear in the green box, which are really those things that are a little more highly engineered, and there's fewer suppliers, you don't have as many choices from which to move around in the supply chain. So again, how do we take this information and how do we apply it in our daily activities, and what does it really mean to us? Well, I've kind of represented the curve in a slightly different manner here. It's a little steeper, kind of hockey stick there, and really the notion is here is getting to a collaborative partnership with somebody. And why is that important to be collaborative and to have an open book cost model or at least a good working relationship with your customer, with your suppliers? Well, in the next slide, a simple representation, because if you're constantly dealing in a competitive sort of aggressive sort of way, you're never going to achieve the kind of savings that you want to achieve, and it's going to take you a long, long time to get to where you want to be. Like, you'll never get to open book. There's absolutely no way you will be at a point where you'll actually trust each other enough for a supplier and a customer to have those types of discussions. So you're going to kind of be stuck at, just dealing on price or trying to do some bottom-up cost, engineering sort of activity in sort of a hopeful manner of getting price out of whatever products it is that you're either selling or buying. Now, just some basics that we've all kind of seen over time, and if we look at a competitive model versus a collaborative model, when we can get to sort of an open book costing sort of a philosophy. On the competitive side, obviously if you're used to an environment where you have many suppliers and there's great uncertainty really is driven by the fact that there is constant market testing going on. Having run purchasing organizations in the past, I will tell you that was one of our go-to things, right? And try to take cost out of whatever commodity we were dealing with. It's time for a market test. It's, I don't know how many times someone would say, boy, when was the last time you performed a market test on insert name of commodity here? But all that really translates into uncertainty. And frankly, at the end of the day, it also leads to suppliers that you're dealing with that maybe are not terribly profitable. And and as a customer, I don't want my suppliers in a non-profitable situation selling me products. First and foremost, because it really isn't sustainable long term. I don't want to have to resource my suppliers every few years because of the fact that they're bleeding cash and that they don't think they're going to be around for much longer. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a few slides down the road here. And then also when you look at future product and the way you go to market, again, it was all kind of done through market testing, and after the design phase, kind of right at the end when it became critical to get products sourced so that we can meet timing to our ultimate customer. And again, it's really done in sort of a last minute, in a hurry, without a terribly thoughtful plan or strategy that's been kind of evolved and implemented. So to get away from that, when we look at the collaborative model, we're really talking about moving from many to fewer suppliers. Few suppliers meaning strong suppliers who have the right quality and supply standards that we want to be dealing with, and who also have the ability to engage us in things like open book costing, where we feel very comfortable working with the supplier in that we are getting a fair shake and that they're actually making money and they're going to be around for a long time. Leads to stronger predictability within the supply chain, right? If you go from a situation where you're working with 50, 60, or 100 stampers, and you can move down to a handful, 6, 10, 12, depending on maybe having 2 or 3 or 4 go-to suppliers in various areas, they know that they're going to be constantly called on by their strategic customer, kind of looking at it in reverse, to for future quoting and to help them do some things. And that's very comforting, obviously, to both sides, and does lead to predictability. This all translates into getting away from market testing and not having to go out there with that 3 quotes and a cloud of dust mentality, and enables us to really focus on the cost drivers and cost modeling. And when I'm talking about focusing on cost drivers, I'm really saying that we can actually look at opportunities that we can jointly identify to take cost out. Maybe through VA, VE activities or lean activities, or maybe it's through material buy programs or whatever it is, but ways to truly drive costs down. And then hopefully these things all translate into a healthy product for the supplier, again, so that they're here next year and 5 years and 10 years from now, and are making the kind of margins that they need to make so they can reinvest in their company and buy new equipment and replace equipment that needs to be replaced, and to make the capital improvements that they need to make in order to be considered a key supplier going forward. And then ultimately, what this leads to is being involved in future product sourcing up front, and not at the last minute, but hopefully during design phase. So there can be a collaborative effort to figure out how best to manufacture products and design them so that there is ease of manufacture for the supplier, and maybe take some cost out up front and really focus on the cost drivers and not just kind of being so focused on the fact that we're already 6 weeks behind on our normal lead time to get these products into the plant that they need to go to, that we can really worry about the things we need to up front. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to kind of look at this thing both as a supplier and as a customer, and why this sort of activity and way of looking at costing is important from both perspectives. Okay, so we've already talked a little bit about, from the strategic supplier side, reduced warranty risks and costs associated. Absolutely, we see it every day now, and as I mentioned before, almost it's weekly in the popular press. We see things and see stories about warranty issues and hundreds of thousands of vehicles being recalled. Leads obviously in the next bullet point to stronger design and technology collaboration. And again, I'm talking right up front and not at the last minute. Up front when you actually have an opportunity to impact design and impact cost, versus trying to have these conversations at the last minute where it is, it's a nice thing to talk about, but the practical application of being able to do something, when your customer is clamoring to have product in their shops is really, going to lead to nothing appropriate happening at that point in time. Moving faster to market. One of the opening slides we talked about very briefly the fact that everybody is looking for a way to kind of contract the time from a recognition of need occurs until a product is actually marketable to the end customer. So strategic suppliers can play a very important role in getting product to market much faster. The next bullet point, something that, frankly, as a purchasing professional, I think, from a purchasing guy side of things, we kind of throw these terms around of, key suppliers, fewer suppliers, and they kind of have almost lost their meaning. But really, when you talk about a strategic supplier relationship and having sort of an open book cost relationship with somebody, it really does and should appropriately lead to becoming a key supplier for someone. And I can tell you firsthand that when you're a large tier 1 and you've got 150 stampers in your base, you don't want to try to be managing 150 stampers. You want to be trying to manage 15 or 10 or 12 or whatever the number is, so that if you actually can get to a point where you can get to an open book cost situation, your customers are going to look at that as just an incredibly important attribute that you can offer them, and they will reward you in kind for that. And the other thing, when you talk about a strategic relationship based on open book costing, it really does kind of help transcend and get away from this withholding information and kind of, sort of the iterative process of going back and forth through the quoting process, and does get to a level of transparency that is really very desirable. And again, becomes a not a I'll show me mine if you show me yours kind of data scenario, but more of let's talk about what is truly driving the cost of those products and what we can do to take cost out. And again, we're talking about a discussion driven by data, not by conjecture, but by actual data and real life examples. And then intense focus on continuous improvement. Obviously, I don't think that's going to change anytime soon, but what a nice breath of fresh air to be able to get away from an LTA mentality of, oh, I've got to come up with a 3% cost reduction, which will be easy for me as the supplier because I've already baked in cost reductions for the 5 years that we have an LTA with my customer, so I'm already charging them too much. Now, we want to get away from that and get down to a discussion of, what should the product cost me initially, and then how do we go and find those incremental areas for improvement going forward by looking at continuous improvement opportunities. And we'll also be talking about more consistent savings. The historical model or the competitive model really is just kind of based on how you feel on any particular point or any particular day and time. And what do we need today to win some business? And frankly, as we're all aware, a lot of times those sorts of discussions are driven by quarterly expectations when you're a publicly traded company, and not really what's best for the company, but what's best for the company today, because we have to report some numbers in a few weeks, and that's really a terrible way to run a business. You know, we also talk about strategic relationships where you can build a relationship faster, where you have open trust that goes both ways, and you can learn to share data appropriately and truly trust one another and try to find a better relationship. You know, and ultimately changing from combative to collaborative. Okay, so now flip the cards a little bit. You know, strategic customers. So as a supplier, why do I want strategic customers? Or what are they going to ask from me? Really, when we talk about things like raw material indexing or currency indexing, when we talk about open book cost models, you know, raw material and currency fluctuations play a huge part in the ultimate price at which a product is sold, or at which as a customer you buy the price, or excuse me, you buy the product. And frankly, raw material increases impact that. They just don't go away. They're real. We've all experienced them. You have to have a way to be able to deal with it. You have to have a way to talk about it in an open manner, and there's no better way to do those things than by having a data-driven discussion. Same goes for currency fluctuations. Really, something else that's incredibly important too, you know, it sounds kind of corny here, but more fair contracts, and that really is focusing on those things that are truly important and making a contract between a supplier and a customer, making it so that it truly focuses on those things. And if it's, you know, just working on design going forward with a target of getting 1 or 1.25 or 1.5% out every year, then that should be it, and not just focusing on, you know, a kind of an arbitrary 3% reduction. And as I mentioned prior, that's been baked in at the beginning of the program. So the product that you buy in year one, you know you're overpaying for it as, you know, as a customer. But it's one of those things, be careful what you wish for. It may come true. If you've got a purchasing organization that you're dealing with where the buyers are expected to get a 3 or a 4% reduction every year, then obviously they've been kind of taught and they've been incented to bake that in up front so that they can be sure they hit their targets every year. And frankly, and unfortunately, one of the reasons that occurs is not only because that's the way they're measured, but that's because those are the sort of discussions that have transpired in the past. So there really isn't an open, clear understanding of what a product should cost up front, that people tend to focus on the kind of the go-forward position and the annual cost reductions, because that's how people are rewarded. And longer contracts, whether they're for you know, 5, 6, 7 years, or even for the program life. And to get away from this, you know, being 3 or 4 or 5 years into a program and having to worry about having product resourced from you, because somebody's going to do some midlife market testing and see if they can take a few extra points out of the product at that point. I've already talked about it quite a bit, upfront early sourcing, and really the focus on cost reduction and not margin erosion. And this is kind of an odd concept to a lot of people. And I can tell you from personal experience, if we go back about 10 years, there wasn't a whole lot of thought or certainly worry applied to whether or not a supplier was actually making money at the end of the day. It was really more as a buyer of products, my thoughts and my team's thoughts are really more geared toward, are we hitting our savings goals today? You know, have we met that 3% reduction with this supplier? And if they're not doing very well and not making a lot of money, well, they'll figure it out over time. And really the whole notion of focusing on cost reduction and not taking, you know, margin out of the product and reducing profitability is a key component to this, and not only a key component to make sure that the supplier is there next year and the year after, but really it's one of those things upon which the foundation of trust is built, that if you can, you know, you get involved in a sort of open book relationship, two-way relationship, that you can talk about profit openly and you can celebrate the wins when you do find those opportunities to take cost out and split some things so that profit margins can actually increase a little bit, even though the final cost of the product can come down. Just very quickly, one of the premises of open book costing is accurately costing products, right? It kind of goes without saying. But why is that important, and what does that mean to a business? Well, inaccurate costing systems. We're talking about internal inaccurate costing systems that, for example, apply burden rates kind of as an average across an entire manufacturing facility. Maybe there's 15 different manufacturing stations or locations or processes throughout a plant, and instead of having different burden rates for each of those things, we have kind of one average rate for the whole facility. Well, if that's kind of the costing system that you use going forward, when you look at it from a quote new business standpoint, what it's going to tend to do is you're going to end up winning business that's really not profitable for you because you've undercosted some things, and you're going to, as I have in quotes here, not win business because you've quoted it high, higher than actual in certain other areas. Sort of stating that in a slightly different way, and really what it leads to is a very profound inability to do some things. Inside your own four walls, what it does is really prevents you from understanding where you're profitable and where you're not. At the end of the day, again, because if you're undercosting things and you're overcosting things, and people will tend to start buying the things that you're undercosted on and not buy the things you're overcosted on, you're really kind of messing up your profitability at the end of the day. And really when it gets to the, excuse me, the third point in blue there under the second orange bullet point, inability to manage your business part by part, and that's really, it causes you to kind of misprice product to your customers, and also kind of messes up your opportunities to look at cost improvements. If you try to go to an open book, or you try to say, hey, where can we really go on some of these things, you're not going to have a very realistic view of the world as it kind of manifests itself in your four walls. And as a purchasing guy, the last one is incredibly important from my perspective, and that's really this whole notion of being able to properly assess make versus buy. And what I mean by that is for companies who not only manufacture stampings but also buy stampings and maybe create assemblies with that they sell to other folks, you're not going to really understand where your sweet spot is internally, and you're going to make some bad decisions there when you're trying to figure out, should we make this part internally or should we outsource it to somebody else? Okay, and just kind of going along with those themes, so inaccurate costing by its very nature, you're either going to be too high or too low, and really what that translates into is that over time your shop floor is going to be very busy where your products are undercosted, and you're virtually going to have no business where you're overcosted. That means you're going to win out on good business, or you're going to lose out on good business, and you're going to win a bunch of bad business. And ultimately, over time, that's going to lower the profitability of your company. So open book cost models, what are they? Really a collaborative tool that's jointly developed and really designed to understand a supplier's true cost structure. So as you hold the end item in your hand, it's really having a good grasp of breaking that into kind of its 5 basic elements of material, labor, burden, SG&A, and profit, and really truly understanding what those are and agreeing to them up front. And again, creating that level of transparency between a supplier and a customer at the end of the day, so there is a level of trust there, and you can make good decisions going forward. And using some of this information to really determine and form long-term relationships. Again, I keep using the term strategic suppliers or key suppliers. It is my very fervent belief that getting to open book cost modeling is really one of the things that should form one of the key elements of determining who your key suppliers are as you look beyond today and into the future. Excuse me. And the last item here under this particular heading is really the opportunity to identify risks, and reward areas for you, and that is using the data that helps drive open book costing and saying, hey, I can benchmark certain of these elements with other people and tell you that you're kind of lagging behind where some other people are here, and then focusing on that particular area, whether it's maybe the price of the raw material that's being applied to the product, if there are ways to buy things differently, or if maybe you've got some other opportunities there, but using data to drive those discussions. So what do you use Open Book to do? And it's really to drive data-driven discussions. A very key point, we're going to hammer on it over and over again, to identify and eliminate waste, and really to become the baseline for any future pricing related discussions. How powerful is it if you have an open book cost model with a customer, and you can go back to the customer and say, hey, some major event has happened that's driven the price of my raw material up. And here it is, as we sit through our cost model that we've already agreed to and that we've established between our two companies, and I can put in my new raw material cost and flow it through the model and show you the actual impact on the end item that you're buying from me. And now we can try to figure out ways to alleviate that cost increase. Or maybe there are some things for, in the short term, you can provide me some relief while we work on those things, because at the end of the day, if you can help me out a little bit here, we're going to establish a better relationship, and we're going to be around a lot longer, both of us. So if we look at the notion of open book costing, and we we'll sort of look at it in sort of what I call the current business model, or it's really more of a competitive sort of way, in a very simplistic look here. The product that we're looking at is kind of designated by the blue bar here in two suppliers, supplier A and B. And if we use a very typical sort of way that we kind of have gone about the purchasing process in the past, it was really price-driven, right? So if the height of the blue bar represents the price, obviously assuming that quality and delivery and payment terms and all those things are important to purchasing folks are equal, in this example, supplier A is going to get the business every time, because at the end of the day, I'm going to get it for less money. Let's kind of add the element of cost transparency in here, where we can, and again, I've kind of depicted it here just with the yellow portion of the bars instead of breaking it down into material, labor burden, and SG&A, and I've left profit kind of in the green part of the top. But see if we can actually kind of do a deep dive into cost. Maybe there are some things that we can work on together. Myself as the customer and supplier B as my supplier in this example, where we can jointly work to take costs out. And believe it or not, the profit bar in B prime to the far right there is actually a little bigger than it is in B on the left, where we can take costs out and maybe increase your profit. And at the end of the day, I end up with buying the product from you, but even at a lesser total price than what I was going to pay supplier A. Now, what this really translates into visibility and cost leads, to better decision making and better management at the end of the day. A very simple example, but we've seen this, through our work with our customers time and time again over the last 10 years or so. So if we look at the kind of what we've termed the cost management puzzle here, what are the pieces? And I'll go ahead and just kind of put all these out real quick here. So when we talk about the cost management puzzle, that's dealing with things like cost breakdowns from your suppliers when you get, when you go out for quote. And once you get these breakdowns, do you have a way to handle this data, or is it just shoved in a drawer, or is it stored on an email someplace? And do you use this data to help start to drive this notion of cost models, whether you're doing them jointly in an open book sort of way, or you're just building your own cost models because you're the buyer and you're the expert on a particular deck. Are you using these cost breakdowns to try to do some things, maybe some benchmarking up front, to try to have a better understanding of those products that you buy? And once you do some of this cost modeling, what do you do with that? Are you using that data to kind of drive or create a strategic supplier program, or do you even use that in your sourcing process? I think we would all say, yes, we do those things, but at the end of the day, do you really do it? Or is it just sometimes? And I think if I can tell you from my past experience, if I'm completely honest, in the groups that I've managed, I'm sure that we were doing those things sometimes, and we weren't doing them to the best of our ability. And are we truly benchmarking these cost drivers across our products, and then using that information for continuous improvement activities? So kind of looking at the previous slide in a different way, the depiction here is just very simply that if you do some of these things, if you have cost breakdowns and you can kind of maybe move into some modeling and then look at some other things relative to continuous improvement or collaborative optimization as it's portrayed here, that it really is sort of a building and an additive process. And then if you go to the far left and you're just kind of dealing on price, you're going to get very minimal savings. But if you can kind of get to the far right and, get to a point where you have constant cost breakdowns that are formatted the way you want to see them, and you're able to get to cost, open book cost modeling, or you're able to do the benchmarking activities with this thing. If you use a combination, that's where you're going to get your best end result. Okay, just a brief word on robust cost management program, and really just kind of moving from just providing feedback to to help understand where a supplier is good. So the meaning there is if you have a robust cost management program, you'll know when your suppliers are best in class because you'll have data to drive that. You'll know for like products who's giving you the best material pricing, who has the best burden rates, where the best labor rates are. And I don't just mean comparing a labor rate from the Midwest, maybe from Indiana to labor rates in China, but I mean really comparing labor rates from two Midwest firms that are just a few miles apart and making sure that you're getting best in class sourcing from people. Helping understand where a supplier can make improvements, or where as a customer you can help supplier make improvements. Again, back to our earlier slide, this is a two-way street, and really there's a shared destiny at the end of the day, and it doesn't truly become collaborative until you both look at it that way. The next bullet point down, helping customers understand how designs and specs drive cost. All too often, we kind of fail. We know the specs, we see them on the blueprints, and we use them to help provide a quote. But we have to ask ourselves, how often do we go back to our customer and do we make suggestions? Hey, if you changed a radius here or did something here, you could actually take some cost out of the thing, make it easier to manufacture, and that'll show up in the price that I end up charging you at the end of the day. Tough to have those if you're not getting involved up front, and again, that's one of the premises of this. If you can get up front, early involvement, you can have those discussions and help drive the actual end cost. And giving feedback to the engineering department on design improvements. I kind of covered that in the previous bullet. And really strategic supplier programs to help identify low-cost providers. And at the end of the day, really, being able to source products to low-cost producers, and the only way you're going to be able to do that is really getting from the tactical sourcing to something that's a little more strategic and a little more collaborative, right? So very quickly, types of cost modeling. Sort of if you go from kind of rudimentary to more developed, we look at things like rule of thumb, simply just weighting a product and developing a cost per pound. We look at sort of regression analysis, right? Being able to plot key attributes and look for trends, trying to figure out where the outlier is lying, being able to take that data and apply it in some of the discussions we have with our suppliers to try to negotiate better pricing. If we can look at market basket cost breakdowns, meaning that if we can buy like products from like suppliers and just get appropriate cost breakdowns, we can start to develop some very good benchmarking detail that will actually kind of lead us to understand what our costs should be within certain commodity segments. Kind of the next step would be bottom-up cost estimations, or what we call clean sheet as well. Now, the one caution I would do here is, because a lot of this you drive with data that you've garnered, but one of the dangerous points here is what we would term hyper-optimization of a cost model, where someone is coming back to you as your customer and saying, hey, I've built a cost model and I think you can manufacture the stamping for X. And as you look at the cost model they've given you, yes, they've done that, and they've hyper-optimized the labor rates. You're sitting in the Midwest, you're in Indiana or Ohio, and they're trying to tell you that to get to the point they want you, you have to use the same labor rates as are available in China. Or you're a shop that has a bunch of mechanical presses in play, but they've hyper-optimized using servo presses so they can have the more parts off the machine in a shorter period of time, and it's just not reasonable for you to do that. So that's the caution there. Using industry standards, absolutely. And really kind of the ultimate in our eye is really getting to transparent cost modeling or open book. Okay, so why open book? It's the fastest path to a number of things. And as I mentioned, sometimes we call open book transparent cost modeling, but it really is the fastest path to an open relationship. Again, the two-way street, the give and take, and really the shared destiny. It's the fastest path to collaboration, and really, truly is the fastest path to getting to more savings more quickly, and getting away from a traditional LTA sort of mentality. What's involved in open book costing? Really, I've got a few examples here, and rather than to go through in the last little bit of time we have here, I think we've got about 15 minutes remaining in our time allotment. Just look at some of the kind of the key drivers here. If we look at fabrications, kind of in the upper left-hand side of the slide, we talk about raw material and really flowing through the exact data. So this is the kind of thing that you will need to get to, and you need to be prepared to share or ask your sub-suppliers for. If you kind of look down the food chain as opposed to up, and being able to talk about scrap credit and how much per pound you get for your various raw materials, and being able to talk about direct labor and the fact that you really shouldn't be using a peanut butter spread for direct labor across a manufacturing facility. You really should be tracking it back to, a work cell and determining if there are different levels of direct labor used for different levels of work within the plant. And then obviously on the bottom left side there, burden rates that are truly based on manufacturing activity that occurs to a product. And again, not using plant-wide burden rates, but in the example there using different burden rates, whether we're talking about laser cutting or shearing, and not using an overall plant rate of $50 an hour, but using the $62.20 for the laser and the $30.55 an hour for the shearing, and using that information to either roll up the quote that you give your customer, or if you are the customer, getting that level of understanding as you look at the quote you get from your supplier. A couple more examples on the forging side. Again, being able to look at the labor rates and kind of the throughput and the burden rates that are used, and setup time is very important, obviously, when we're talking about forgings. Screw machine, the same sort of thing. Again, different manufacturing machinery throughout the organization has different burdens. And aluminum die cast. Now, just a very quick stampings example here. When we look at things, and we're going to focus kind of on the right-hand side and the grouping of information that has a number 5 where it says equipment burden rates. If you look at that very closely, you'll see sort of going from top to bottom, moving from 100-ton presses to 600 and 800-ton presses there. And you'll see that the per hour burden rate changes with each change in press. Using the same sort of OEE, and you see the setup times there. But this is what I'm talking about when I'm saying, you don't want to just arbitrarily put burden rates or labor rates in there. You want to actually, you want to put the actual rates in there to help determine how to cost product. If you're trying to figure out what price to sell to your customer, or if you are the customer, this is the way you go about trying to understand how your supplier, what the optimal price would be from your supplier, and not trying to go back to them and force a burden rate that doesn't make any sense for a product that runs across a 600-ton press, which shows about a $65 burden rate here, saying, hey, you should be able to do that at about $9 an hour, or something that's a little more consistent with a 100-ton press. And this is the level of detail you need to get to, and frankly, not everybody's comfortable getting to this level of detail. Now, also, if you travel along these lines, we've talked a little bit about benchmarking. You can take this same sort of information and look at it. And really what this is just a simple representation, and we've cleaned up the data here that in a bid process we were involved in a while back. It's roughly 7 suppliers there, but the same product, and really breaking it down into the basic components that make up the end item price, and doing some benchmarking and seeing that, gosh, if I look at, suppliers A through F there, who has the best material rate, who has the best blank utilization or labor or SG, whatever it is, being able to take and to kind of use this information for your discussions with your providers. And that really, this allows you to kind of start to build savings roadmaps as a purchasing organization as you go forward, to kind of say, okay, they may not be best in class today, but they were a little bit better than average, and we have some opportunities there to work with them. And now we can start talking about ideas to, to facilitate a better blank utilization, or to maybe do some things on the material side, and maybe some things you leave alone. Maybe direct labor you don't want to get involved in, or SG&A you don't want to get involved in. But at least it helps you facilitate discussions in the right areas. And that's why in the earlier slide when we say, gosh, if you don't truly have cost transparency, you may be having discussions about taking cost out in the wrong areas. Okay, so kind of a pragmatic approach then is taking that information on the previous slide, and and as a buyer, as a manager of buyers, this is what I would like to see my buyers do, taking these 7 suppliers and kind of arraying this data and trying to figure out who's truly the best out there, which is kind of signified in the yellow box. And in this example, a negative number is good. And you can see supplier G is roughly 11% below whatever hurdle rate we were using here, and you can see that they've been rated the #1 supplier in the ranking down below. So really the whole notion here is to be strategic and use data appropriately to help figure out who your low-cost providers are. And really, this isn't an exercise about fixing suppliers, but it's really a way to try to discover areas to focus on for continuous improvement, and to help you better understand as a buyer of products where your key suppliers may need some help. Now, inversely, as a supplier of products, this is a great tool to use too. So if you can get this feedback, to do the same things, to show you where you're a little deficient, where maybe I can see where I'm sort of best in class, but I can also see where I'm lagging the rest of the world, and where I need to put my resources and spend some time to try to improve. We talked briefly about building a roadmap, and this is really using those same elements to use that transparency to drive costs down, to use these benchmarking data points, and to really come up with a roadmap for improvement and savings down the road, and be able to do things like where I'm at today versus best in class, and to see what I can do with my fixed assets, and maybe to try to figure out where I am compared to market, and maybe where I'm underpricing compared to market, and maybe where I'm overpricing compared to market, and then at least I have some data to make some real decisions going forward. Here's a real-world example. I've kind of cleaned it up a little bit just for just for presentation purposes here, but really this is one product that kind of went through 3 phases with the provider. Up front, there was kind of an initial quoting process that, hey, we need this product, give us a price. The price was provided about $6 per unit. There was some standard cost information shared in sort of a kind of a middle breakthrough sort of way, and was the customer and the supplier were able to kind of reduce the price significantly at that point in time. But then they also went to the next level, and through a strategic initiative got to open book costing, where at the end of the day they even saved more money out there. And really what's important, moving kind of from the the standard quote process to the open book costing on the far right, is if you look at the various color striations within the horizontal, or excuse me, the vertical bar, you can see that at the end of the day, really where cost was taken out was in raw material. It was in the burden costs and doing some things differently. SG&A was pretty much left alone, and labor was left alone. But really, there was, at the end of the day, by taking material cost out and reducing some burdens by appropriately kind of applying them the way we talked about earlier, the provider, the supplier, was actually able to realize a greater profit at the end of the day. Even though they were considerably under their $6 original entry, they were, I think, at like $4.90 or something is what it was, the final agreed upon price through the open book cost model. So the message here is very simple. Healthy profit for a provider can lead to an incredibly healthy supply chain and a truly strategic partnership, and you don't just have to worry about low price, and that's it at the end of the day. All right, so this is really geared toward engaging suppliers in open book, but obviously you can kind of flip it and do a 180 on it as well. Our recommendation is always very simple. Tie your strategic supplier status for your suppliers to engaging in open book costing. In one of my first slides, I talked about having a strategic supplier program. But this is really getting to a truly strategic supplier program where you have key elements that in order to qualify, you must be able to check the box with these guys. And I strongly suggest that open book costing would be one of those things. Another way to try to convince people that open book costing is the way to go is to tie early sourcing to it. Excuse me, again, no better way or to have a good discussion about taking cost out than to have it up front early in the sourcing process, not at the last minute when everybody's scrambling. Again, and that should be something that's reserved for people who are truly strategic suppliers. Supply-based reduction and rationalization is something we all live with on a day-in, day-out basis. We have all been faced with the notion of having to do more work with the same or less resources going forward, which from a purchasing standpoint means I need to be working with the core few suppliers and not every supplier in the world who can provide me a product. I think if you tie this to supply-based rationalization, saying one of the first elements we're going to use to move away from suppliers is if they won't engage us in open book costing, we'll have to take that into very serious consideration. Now, obviously, there are challenges to that. For example, if you have a supplier who has a proprietary product or process, well, you can't use open book costing at that point in time to tie strategic sourcing to that, because if they're the only game in town, then you're kind of stuck with them. So you have to be a little judicious in that. But if you do have an example where you've got 135 injection molders or stampers that you're dealing with, and you want to get down to something that's more manageable, a very easy way to make a first pass at that is to figure out who those people are who are willing to go to some sort of a cost modeling approach with you. A very important part of engaging a supplier in open book is that the supplier has to have final approval, and that it may seem a little odd, but really at the end of the day, if the supplier won't sign up to it and say, yes, I can do this, then really the model has no value. So it has to truly be a two-way street where both the supplier and the customer have agreed to that model, they understand the model, and they both can articulate the model equally as well as the other in a go-forward basis. And again, the very last one, we need to ultimately tie current and future business to open book cost modeling, and I think that's a very tremendous way to kind of explain it to your suppliers. Just a few other things that I think are very important, because this is feedback that we've gotten, I think, from some of the folks on the line here as we've talked about this, frankly. That open book cost modeling or cost modeling of any sort really needs to be a cooperative process, and there has to be give and take in it. And it can't be a true cost model if somebody's trying to drive you to a cost that's below your true cost, so that you're losing money. At the end of the day, every company needs to make money, and so going below a supplier's cost means that it's really not truly a partnership. Obviously, in order for the previous slide, for the supplier to agree to it, they have to have direct input to the cost model and final approval. And really, any cost model has to be based on actuals. Again, not hyper-optimized. You should be able to do this for X per hour, but it has to start at least at a place that represents what's truly happening on the shop floor today in the real world. And then you can go from there to look for ways of improving. And at the end of the day, really, the key is in engaging suppliers is if they, for them to have a good position with any customer going forward, they have to be among the proven low-cost producers. All right, getting started. How do people get started with open book costing? We looked at the cost transparency curve early in the presentation. We said, not all products are optimal for this. But there are some key attributes that need to be considered, areas where there's strong spend. Obviously you don't want to spend a lot of time if you're buying $50,000 a year of something, spending it on doing cost modeling. But if you're spending $50 million a year in an organization that buys $100 million worth of direct material, that's a great opportunity to start there. Does somebody have the ability to realign the spend to low-cost strategic suppliers? And by realigning the spend, I mean move from supplier A to supplier B. If supplier A is not willing to sign up for open book cost modeling, and supplier B is, well, there's a great opportunity to move from one to the other. And do you have the ability to leverage new business as you go forward to these suppliers who have agreed to this sort of approach? And do you have a desire, or are you willing to move to fewer strategic suppliers? And again, I'm talking in situations where you can go and move from many to a few, not from a few to even fewer necessarily, although in certain instances that may be very appropriate. And also a key is choosing the right suppliers. Are you dealing with suppliers who do have good quality? Are their capabilities in line with what you look for in a supplier? Are they delivering on time in the manner in which you've asked them to deliver so it makes it easier on your end? Are these providers financially healthy? Or are they, with the new business going forward, hopefully they're even healthier, but are they sustainable today? And by partnering with you, is that going to make them stronger in the future? You don't want to source product to someone who says, hey, I'll do open book modeling with you, and then find out 6 months from now that was kind of a last-ditch attempt to try to save the business, and now they're going under. And do you have the potential to grow the supplier? Do they have room for more business? Or do they have open capacity where you might be able to help them? And again, is the supplier really adaptive, to a more progressive and evolving relationship going forward? Finally, just kind of as a summary slide, really the notion here is being able to transcend from sort of a competitive traditional model to something that's more strategic or collaborative, where it benefits both parties and there is a win-win, so that the customer at the end of the day gets a great product for a better value than what they've seen in the past, and that the supplier at the end of the day has a good working relationship with that customer, and hopefully leads to something that's more profitable long-term from them. And really the notion here is to get away from trying to do things in a sort of tactical manner, but to be an act strategic so that the tactical things become easier for you down the road. And with that, I will turn it back to Chrissy. So I think I've just about hit my time marker there. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you, Bob. As a reminder, if you would like to submit a question, please type into the question box in the right-hand control panel at this time. Okay, I do have one question. I use cost regression analysis to identify influence of cost driver of particular price and to project the future price tendencies based on market trends. What do you think about this tool in terms of should cost modeling?
Yeah, I think that it's clearly and I'm sorry, Chrissy, we're just kind of talking here because I think we were trying to answer at the same time the question.
No problem.
By writing back as you were asking it. So I think if that was on the regression analysis is what you're asking about, correct?
Yes, that seems to be the question. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah, incredibly useful tool that we use with a great number of our clients, frankly, as kind of a stair-step approach to trying to get from where they're at today in a more traditional sort of methodology or relationship to sourcing to try to get to open book, but again, learning how to using the analogy of learning how to walk before you run, and so hopefully that answers the questions. And I know we had a couple of others I think that had come in, and we'll make sure that we get those answers back to everybody over the next day or so. So thank you for the questions that we've seen. I know that I have a very capable associate here who's kind of viewing them in real time. And we certainly appreciate everybody's questions. They're actually very good and very, very poignant to what we're talking about here.
Great. Since there are no further questions, this will conclude today's program. Thank you, Bob, for your presentation, and thank you to everyone for joining us today. A follow-up email will be sent to you soon that includes a link to the archived recording of the webinar and the presentation slides. As a reminder, PMA is hosting their 3rd annual Sourcing Solutions event on September 30th and October 1st in Cleveland, Ohio. Sourcing Solutions is a powerful procurement program which brings together buyers and suppliers of fabrications, metal stampings, components, special tooling and dies, assemblies, and more. This program is designed to introduce buyers to top quality suppliers in a single location who have been pre-screened based on buyer specifications. You can visit www.pma.org/sourcing solutions for more information. Thank you once again for joining us today. Our webinar is now over and you may close out of your browser. Have a good rest of the day.
Great. Thanks, Chrissy. Thanks, everyone.